We have been going through world religions. We are in Buddhism this week, part two. So we have some folks here for the first time with us. And so when we approach these, we've done Judaism, Islam, Hinduism. This is the fourth of the religions. So we look at them in six categories. We're only going to do you see the last two on tonight's notes. Last week we did the first four. So quick run through, review, and this is how we've approached all the religions, looking at these six categories. Buddhism, first of all, just a Sanskrit word meaning enlightened one. Ultimate concern is another way of saying who is the God, or what are the gods, or the highest beings in these religions. Buddhism is unique in that there is not a God. It's more a philosophy than it is what we would think of a religion, but certainly has religious adherents. We talked about the Buddha, whose name is Siddhartha Gautama. He was the original founder in, somewhere about the 4th, 5th, 6th century BC. He was around. He started out born to a very wealthy family. And tragedy, at 6 or 7 days old, his mother died. Kind of, as we see tonight when we get to the worldview, really influenced his view of life. But because he was wealthy and had all the benefits of that, was raised well, married, started a family, and then decided at about 35, 40 years old, I'm going to try something else. So left his family and became an ascetic, a monk who went out into the wilderness, got like stick thin, like ridiculously thin, didn't eat, didn't do anything. You think of the Buddha, right? Buddha, the statues. Well, at this point in his life, where he's majoring on meditation and all that sort of thing, very much depriving himself, wasting away, until sitting under the Bodhi tree, he had his moment of revelation, and all of it, he was enlightened. All that was Buddhism came to him in that moment. And so for the next 40 or so years of his life, he was the one who instituted and taught others the philosophy that became known today as Buddhism. So while there's no God per se, really Buddhism does revolve around this fellow, the Buddha that we know of. So in many ways, he's the ultimate concern, though not thought of as a God. Sacred writings. Again, because this is exactly how we think of as a religion. We talk about sacred writings. It's not like the Bible or the Quran, these authoritative doctrinal books. These sacred writings are mostly the first two. Well, there's three key ones, and they're called the Tripitaka, which is fun to say, which means three baskets or triple baskets. And so these are the three key sacred writings. The first one, the Vinaya, is the basket of discipline. I got to read about these because it's been a week. This was primarily the idea of discipline. This addresses primarily monks or nuns, those living the monastic life in Buddhism. Those are the ones that you'll find if you visit a Buddhist temple. That's where they will be. And this book deals with the rites, the chants, the different rituals they would need to know. The second of the baskets, the Sutta, is the basket of lessons. These first two are teachings of the Buddha himself, sayings or the like that he had. And the basket of lessons would be not just limited to the monks or the monastics of Buddhism, but they are open to anybody to learn the philosophy, the way of life of the Buddha. And the final basket, the Abhidhamma, is not at all attributed to Buddha. This is the followers of Buddha for the next several hundred years after he dies, discussing the things in these two baskets and kind of making comments on them and application for them. So these two are thought to be the words and the work of Buddha. This is commentary on what he did. But again, it's not like these are authoritative type things, like they tell you. They're not like the history we might think so much as about Buddha, what he said, how he acted, and how you can be like him, be like Buddha, right? What would Buddha do? WWBD, be their bracelet instead of JD, I guess. Moral code, we think this, we would think 10 Commandments and the like. For the moral code called Sila in Buddhism, they're all thou shalt nots or prohibitions. There are 10. The first 5 are for everybody. If you want to be a good Buddhist, these are the 5 things that you live by. You do not take a life. Buddhists are largely vegetarians for this reason, not just don't take a human life, but any life. Don't take what is not given. We can see, don't murder, don't steal, you get that. Don't commit sexual misconduct in any way. Don't give false speech. Don't use intoxicants. If you're a follower of Buddha, if you're a Buddhist, anybody takes these. They try to memorize them by using their hand. These 5 moral precepts: life, stealing, sexual misconduct, speech, and intoxicants. Now, if you want to be a monk, you want to be a nun, you really want to go deep into Buddhism, you got 5 more. And these are tough. You can't eat after midday. So anybody that came to dinner, Todd, you just sinned. I'm sorry. Bad news for you. You avoid all worldly amusements. You think about the monastic lifestyle in Buddhism. They are in temples. They are in these shrines. Their life is consisting of just living there in meditation and the like. You don't adorn the body, whether with jewelry or perfumes or in any way. You never sleep on a high or luxurious bed. So I'm out. The older I get, don't want to be Buddhist, want a nice comfy bed. And you cannot accept gold or silver. This was a comment last week that I said I had to do homework about, because the question was, if Buddhist monks can't accept gold or silver, why do they have these doggone ornate temples? And how does that go? So looked into it. In the Eastern Buddhist tradition, while the monks themselves cannot accept gold and silver, it is advantageous to achieve a higher plane of existence to what's the phrase they use? Basically, it's to score karma points, is to give big amounts of money to these temples. And so there are very wealthy people in like Thai Buddhism, China, that donate large amounts of money to the temples that allow them to be built. There's even those who donate internationally so that temples can be built elsewhere outside of kind of that far eastern area where Buddhism is primarily, most of its adherents are. So the monks don't receive the gold and silver. They don't spend it either, but it is given sometimes just in small bits by people that go to these temples to worship or pray or whatever they do, which we'll talk about in a minute. Sometimes by large donations of the wealthy. The monks aren't responsible. There's usually a separate entity that oversees the money because monks aren't allowed to handle the money. But they do so well that some of these temples become self-supporting by becoming lending agencies. They receive so much in donation, they begin to make loans in the community. And when people pay them back, obviously they get the interest, and they're apparently very aggressive about foreclosure, about repossession. If you can't pay, they're coming for your stuff. And that enriches them.
I mean, number one,
what's that?
Don't take a life.
Well, that's why the monks don't do it. The others do.
Those are for the common folk, the first ones.
That's true. But if you give enough money. So
there's always an exception to the rule.
And the other thing about this is the monks aren't paid. So if you're a monk and you live at the temple, primarily if you're a monk, and you're not getting a salary, you don't go to the market, it's expected that people will donate food so that you can eat. In certain cultures, at the right time of day, it's obviously before midday, around mid-morning, there's a process where monks will make an alms walk, and they'll walk through the town with a bowl. And the expectation is, if you're a good Buddhist, you'll put food in the bowl and they'll take it back to the monastery. And that's the food that they will live on. Sometimes in Buddhism too, people make offerings of food at the temple. They'll come and maybe they don't have money, particularly in other cultures. And so they'll leave some foodstuffs. That's not so much a Western Buddhist thing. Like up in the Redlands, you're not seeing the monks out of that one going around to the different farms. I want your avocado. I want your mango. That's not a Western thing. That's mostly an Eastern thing. But Western wise, because of the way that they work, it's expected that adherents will provide for the needs of the monks. So the monks can devote all of their time to living in the temple and in meditation, not maintaining the temple either. The monks aren't responsible for keeping the temple up. So that's common work. Monks are responsible for meditating, for entering a higher level of consciousness, and all of the finances that are needed are managed outside of the monks, but they are benefited by the gifts. Does that answer the question we left off with last week? It's kind of an interesting thing to think about, particularly when I found out that in some places, temples are some of the biggest lenders in town. Like if you need a mortgage, if you need to buy a house, you go to the Buddhist temple because they seem to have access to the funds, which is a very interesting thing. So that's the moral code. It's mostly things you should avoid. When we get to worldview today and we talk about the eightfold path, you'll see kind of why these things go together. Next, we talk about ritual acts. We use the same word with Hinduism, puja, which is worship. Anything that involves offerings and gifts. So these are things that adherents to Buddhism offer their worship, although worship, not in our sense, they're not worshiping the Buddha. They're not worshiping a god. These are ceremonial activities that are trying to bring them to a state of higher consciousness, we might say, rather than connect with any particular deity. They do this through mantras and chant. A lot of this is similar, by the way, to Hinduism, if you remember that one, for those of you. So mantras, chanting, they'll do that a lot. Mala, these are beads. They're kind of like prayer beads, or not quite the rosary, but they're beads that they use to focus their minds. They're not specific prayers like a rosary bead, but they focus their minds. They're kind of, as I said last week, these are kind of like the fidget spinners for Buddhists. They keep them focused. They don't distract them for those who need it. Obviously, meditation, we think Zen Buddhism, very much meditation. They do a lot of bowing as a way to each other and to different places, and they make the offerings, which you just talked about. These are kind of the ritual acts that Buddhists go through. That brings us to the new stuff. So I'll stop. Any questions? I know, like, for some of you, that was a really quick review of 45 minutes to an hour last week.
Is the Hare Krishna an offshoot of Buddhism?
Hare Krishna is an offshoot of Hinduism.
Hinduism.
Yes. So we mentioned that the three main gods of Hinduism, Hare Krishna is an avatar of one of them. And then that became its own sort of weird thing, which we'll cover one day. I don't know when. We're kind of on the Eastern religion, so it'll probably be in that. It'll be soon, I'll say. Anything else? All right, so let's talk about their worldview. As I mentioned with Buddha's life story, a lot of this is going to come out of that. First thing to understand about their worldview comes from the four noble truths that Buddha has discovered and has realized while sitting under the Bodhi tree. While he was under there, as he contemplated his life and the experience of humanity, he decided there is the truth of suffering. There is suffering. Big shot, right? We know this. We see it every day. We experience in our own lives. For the Buddha, I think it goes back to as he considered the first weeks of his life and was living the rest of his life with this tragedy of the loss of his mother, which culturally may have been a pretty big deal. It shaped a little bit about how he saw life. The irony is, though, I still can't put this together. If the loss of his mother affected him, why at some point did he walk out on his family, including his children, and basically go live by himself and ignore them like they didn't exist? But nonetheless, I guess he was trying to teach them life is suffering. And it was there. We're talking about there's pain, there's change, there's just this. And so as a reminder, Buddhism, like Hinduism, believes in reincarnation, the cycle of birth and death and rebirth. And so in your series of lives, you will come to experience suffering. Truth number two, what is causing suffering? Well, the cause of suffering primarily comes from our attachments and desires. As we live in this world, there are things and people we get attached to. There are things that we want. And when those people we're attached to, there's conflict, well, that can cause suffering. When there's loss, that can cause suffering. We have desires for things that we can't have, and that causes suffering. Some of these things are born out of our own misunderstanding, or actually they use the word ignorance of what's really important in life. And so we desire the wrong things. We get attached to the wrong things. Sometimes it's about our pride, thinking we deserve this or that. And so in our pride of deserving, we don't get it. These things cause us to suffer. So he sees the world, he says there's suffering everywhere. And then he thought some more and says, why is there suffering everywhere? Because we have attachments and desires. So now he says we need to get to the cessation of suffering. There's got to be a state where we're no longer suffering. This is what will be the goal of Buddhism, to enter the state of nirvana, where you break free from the cycle of life, birth, and life, death, and rebirth, and you break free from suffering, and you enter into this state where you have no more desires and you don't suffer, and you're released from the cycle. I don't know what happens in nirvana other than you receive a higher consciousness. There's no afterlife. There's no idea of like heaven, a place that's better that you go to. It's just you kind of, I don't even know if you'd say it's becoming one with the universe, as much as it is, you no longer are trapped in the physical cycle of life and death and rebirth. And you are because you no longer have attachment to any of the things that you were attached to, and no longer have desire for any of the things that you desired, and so you're released from them. One of the unique parts about Buddhism that we talked about last week is there is this point where when you reach that goal, where you have ceased from suffering and attachments and all of that sort of thing, you have a choice to end your human existence and go into nirvana, whatever that means, or to remain on earth to help other people try to attain nirvana. And that is what the Buddha did under that tree when he came to this great enlightenment. He decided rather than leave this life and go into nirvana, he would stick around and help the rest of the people on earth figure this out. And so nirvana is apparently the highest goal, but somewhat your choice of when you go in there. But ultimately, you have to get out of the suffering. And the only way to cease from suffering is to follow the path of the Buddha. Makes sense, right? Four Noble Truths. There is suffering. It's caused by attachment and desire. We don't want to suffer. It can be ended. How do you end it? By following the way. The way is the Eightfold Path. So also called the middle path, because it's the middle between life and death. You're kind of out of that circle. It's the middle between excessive desire and excessive denial. It's somewhere in the middle of everything. And so this is how you achieve nirvana. This is how you get rid of suffering. And there are 8 points of this. The first one is right understanding. You have to look at the world rightly. Of course, what do you think is important in right understanding? It's remembering, knowing, living by those 4 noble truths that we talked about. It's by studying the teachings of the Buddha and his wisdom in those 3 books, the 3 baskets, particularly the first 2, the Tripitaka, that are the kind of the most sacred writings of Buddhism. Right understanding is allowing that teaching to, or dharma as it's sometimes called, to be a part of your life so that you look at things rightly. From right understanding, you move to right intention. So this goes from knowing something to your motivations. Primarily, this has in mind giving up harmful behaviors. Undergirding the whole system of Buddhism and this reincarnation cycle is the idea of karma. And if you're going to build good karma, you have to understand how the world works and do the right things, have the right intentions, but to avoid, which is why the moral code is mostly a bunch of don'ts. There's not a lot that it says to do as much as it says you have to avoid these things. Along with right intention, you have to have right speech, which primarily we saw as you don't lie. Not good to lie. That's a big no-no. Gossip, slander, harsh words, abusive language, all of that sort of thing. So you want to be honest and kind in your speech. So these three are really what is summed up in the moral code. Those 5 things that we looked at. They help us get right intent, right understanding, right intention, and right speech, which leads fourthly, the right conduct or right action. So when you get these, when you understand the world and you have the right motives and you control your speech, which the scriptures say isn't easy, then you begin to act right. You ever told your kids you better start acting right? This is Buddhism. You gotta act right. How important is acting right? Because if you act wrong, you build bad karma, and that means when you come back in your next life, you're going to be worse. And so you wanna understand the world, motivate, speak, act right. Fifthly, right livelihood. This is primarily about that idea of attachment. Greed is very much frowned upon in Buddhism, in spite of what was said about the temple and how they're funded and relying on the wealthy. Someone trying to achieve nirvana and enlightenment in Buddhism will avoid greed. They will be ethical in how they make money. They will not in any way exploit people or try to live in excess. Again, this is the middle path. It's not, by the way, in Buddhism that wealth is wrong, but it's an extreme that comes out of desire and attachment, which we're trying to rid ourselves from. So livelihood says, how can I thread the needle between having what I need, but not having too much and be contented? By the way, that sounds like there's something about contentment in there is important. Again, some of these principles kind of overlap from what we would believe. Different motivations behind them, but nonetheless, they're there. Number 6, the right effort. In some ways, this is redundant. This is the definition that I found of it: to guard against impure or unwholesome thoughts and actions. How is that different from everything we just said? I don't know. But I guess Buddha really liked the number 8 and he was stuck. Kind of like the preacher that's trying to get that 4th point because that's what he needs and makes it fit just to get there. I feel like this one is like, haven't we said this every which way already? But this is the next of the 8-fold path. The 7th is right mindfulness. This is living in the moment. The middle way, right? Not caught up by past failures, not focused on some hoped for future, living with full awareness in the moment. This is the carpe diem, the YOLO of the 4th, 5th, 6th century BCE. There we go. Right mindfulness. And then the last one is right concentration. This is all about the meditation. So as you remove these negative elements in the first 7, that allows you in your time of meditation and focus to declutter the mind and to begin to rid yourself of the attachments of going through this 8-fold path, so that the things that cause suffering, you're letting go of those attachments, your desires are moderated, they're not overtaking you. And in this middle way, this 8-fold path, you approach closer and closer to enlightenment, to getting away from suffering and entering into nirvana. Make sense? I'm not selling this, by the way, so there will be no invitation at the end of tonight's lesson.
It sounds like they're backing into the Garden of Eden. Then wanting to wander. Garden of Eden. Well, we just an observation.
So
Honestly, there's a lot of wisdom in all those things that put into the right mindset, I guess, as far as why. Well, the source from which these things come and the reason for which we live. Senses. Living right, thinking right, loving others, whatever, it's.
You could preach some of
You
this with a
could
few
do some of
different,
that, yeah, you could
few
do some
different
of that, but
bits of language.
not to obtain nirvana, but there is actually a lot of wisdom in some of that, those things, but this wrong motivation for those motivations.
Yeah, I had somebody I know, he calls, some calls it devotee, devoted themselves. That's devoted. I call it themselves. Interesting.
So I see a lot of it. While I can say, you could preach this, I also see irony throughout this thing. Again, with the guy who started it, that, we're talking about these things. We already talked about suffering and his suffering and how he caused suffering on others. In an effort to avoid attachment, he caused suffering. I don't think it deals with that thing. That in sometimes pursuing these, there's no consciousness of the other, of the people that this is, if you're the highest place you can be, and we'll talk about their social organization, is to be a monk. That's where you want to be. That is the ideal life of a Buddhist, to aspire to be a monk, to live in a monastery, to have all your needs provided for, which is a very, I guess, I shouldn't say a very good life. It seems like it could become a very self-serving one, that your only attachment comes to yourself. And I don't think that's good either.
Yeah.
We would say the Christian answer to this is that we as believers are to look out for each other in the church, that we need each other, and to love our neighbor, to be a force for Christ in the world, hopefully bringing help, bringing faith, bringing salvation, even practical needs met. And you don't see, this is a very self-centered faith. That's the word I'm looking for. Yes, you say, right livelihood, right effort, right actions. Yeah. Don't lie, don't steal, whatever. But ultimately, it really is focusing on you, who you are. And there's in fact, the further you go, the more isolated you become. Even the monks that might live in a temple spend their days not sitting around the table chatting and educating and interacting with each other, but are legs crossed, meditating, somehow trying to become one, enlightened, and whatever. It's a very self-serving, self-interested faith, because ultimately any religion we look at, and this is an overgeneralization, any religion we look at when we talk about moral codes and ritual acts, and even this worldview, is what do I need to do to achieve something? And the difference with Christianity is our message should not be what you need to do, but let's remember what Christ has done. And because of what he has done, does that affect how I live? Absolutely. If somebody does something great for me, you have gratitude, you live out of that. The motivation is totally upside down in Christianity.
They do right to and help themselves, and the believer, a Christian believer, tries to do the right thing to honor God. So they don't, yeah.
And I think, I wonder, because, again, this Hinduism, Hare Krishna, Jainism, some of these Eastern faiths, I wonder what cultural elements are undergirding some of these ideas, which is odd because Eastern cultures are usually honor-shame culture, which is very much about how you're interacting with people. But an honor-shame culture is also very self-centered. My understanding of everything is how it makes me look or feel. And if you've honored me, if you've shamed me, we're going to have a problem. And so in that, I wonder how much comes out of culture. All right, moving on. So you've got the Four Noble Truths. You're following the Eightfold Path. How are you going to get to nirvana? You go through 4 stages to get there. You start out as Sotapanna is how I would say it. This is one who enters the stream. Like, what's the stream? This enlightened consciousness that is nirvana. This is the first entryway in. This is the initial understanding that there is suffering and I am suffering and others are suffering and I don't want to suffer anymore and I have attachments. And so you enter into the stream of how I'm going to make it to enlightenment. The next step after you've entered the stream is the Sakadagami. Words are great, aren't they? This is the once returner. So returner means this is like reincarnation. When you're at this stage, the second stage, you have the potential just to have to be dead and reborn one more time. You're like right there. It's possible in this life, you could achieve enough that in your next life, you're right to nirvana. So here you become aware of it. Here you start practicing to the point, hey, things are looking up. The next step is the anagami. And this is, you don't have to you have got enough together that you might not have to be reincarnated. This could be it for you. You could be right there. You could be on the doorstep. And if you cross the line, you become the arahant. You're a worthy one and you have experienced nirvana. So, hey, I'm aware of the truths in the Eightfold Path. I'm starting on them. I'm getting good at them. Oh, I'm really good at them. Oh, I have arrived. This is the path they think. The difference between, as we said last week, between Buddhism and Hinduism, it's thought in Buddhism that in one lifetime, or in the extreme, one really good session of meditation, you can achieve nirvana. Hinduism has a much more pessimistic view of ever entering and ever breaking the reincarnation cycle. It's assumed in Hinduism, you're going to go through this hundreds, if not thousands of times to even get close to getting there. So Buddhism is a little, because Buddha, he was about 40 years old when he decided to abandon everything, and it just took him a few weeks under a tree, and he got it all. So it's possible for you too, if you put your mind to it, no pun intended. Okay, I don't know if you can see this very well.
Was Buddha a Hindu before he?
Not in a practicing way. He was born in Nepal. Hinduism was primarily in that. It was arriving about the same time, maybe a little bit before, but it was primarily in India. And so that wonderful Himalayan mountains in 500, 600, 700 BC really separated cultures a lot. So to be in Nepal, where he would have not been so affected by Indian culture, even though they share some similarities. But obviously, there's similarities, so there must be over time, some overlap in these ideas, or some cultural basis to these ideas, that they kind of arose sort of parallel to each other under Buddha and Hinduism.
Is there a female counterpart to being a monk?
A nun.
A nun?
Yes.
Okay, that's the term.
And that's allowed. You should be happy to know.
Okay.
Do you want to be a Buddhist?
So you have to, I'm assuming, be either a monk or a nun to reach nirvana?
That's basically what they think. Although supposedly in one lifetime you could get there. But I don't, that's what the Buddha did. He started as a wealthy guy and renounced all that and basically went to a personal monastic life until he got enlightened. So the caste system it's very much a Hindu idea. It is not a Buddhist idea. So the difference between this is in Hinduism, you need to be born into that higher class, that higher caste to give you access to the better life and moving on up and breaking the cycle. In Buddhism, that is totally rejected. Buddha himself rejected any sort of class or caste system. And so in this case, to be a monk or a nun is available to anybody who so desires and is willing to give up everything and move in.
So I'm like, in one sense, I'm completely confused because they go through all this stuff to get to nirvana, right? But once they reach nirvana, then what? It's like, how do they know they reached nirvana? Who told them they went to nirvana? And then what? I don't even what do you do with that? I've reached nirvana, now do I stop? I could just sit here and for the next 20 years if someone's supposed to be me, but how do they know that? Who tells them that? I don't get, I cannot wrap my head around that.
I think they just decided themselves. They just decide, I have reached nirvana. I am that hero.
Okay, so I can say it myself, and then I kind of undo everything.
And then I choose-
Emotionally went through to get to that.
Yeah, well, then you can choose to be magnanimous and stick around and not die and enter nirvana to help other people get to nirvana. Or you can let it all go and cease the cycle, whatever that means.
So just sit there and don't eat until I die. I mean, like, I don't care. Anyway, I'm just sitting here, so just really trying to wrap my head around that.
Well, maybe this will help.
I
The Buddhist
can't do it.
wheel of life.
My head around it.
This is the wheel of life. This sort of shows the philosophy of Buddhism in a wheel. In the middle of the wheel, you probably can't tell, is a snake, a chicken, and a pig. Why do you ask?
I can't tell.
So these represent the three poisons that are constantly trying to suck us in or to take our life and to cause suffering. The chicken is desire, the snake is anger, and the pig is ignorance. And you probably can't tell because it's small, but the snake and the chicken are coming out of the pig's mouth because anger and attachment ultimately come out of ignorance.
Okay, say those again. The chicken is what?
The snake is anger, the chicken is desire or attachment, and the pig is ignorance.
So it answers the ultimate question. What came first, the chicken or the egg? To throw the pig.
The pig. Next time somebody asks you, just say the pig.
Okay.
I like that.
You got it.
I have to use that when I look at you like.
So these are the three poisons that are tempting all of humanity. This next circle, half of it is light, half of it is dark. This is the good karma and the bad karma. And good karma is pulling you up, and bad karma is pulling you down. So depending on how much you give in to ignorance, anger, or desire will depend whether you're getting better or getting worse. Around this are 6 segments representing the 6 possible lives or categories you could be born into in any particular life. What that means. So we've got the better categories and the worser categories. The middle here on the best would be a monastic life, or actually a godlike life, a demigod, or a monk. So that's what you're going to be. Where am I? Okay, gods, demigods, and humanity. The lower are, you can come back as an animal, you can come back as a ghost, which is this one, and you can come back ghost.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why, a hungry ghost.
Apparently.
Or you could just end up in hell, which is pretty bad. So gods, demigods, humanity, animals, ghosts, or agents of hell.
It looks like hell's bigger than all the other ones.
It does.
Because most people go there, apparently.
It does, yes.
Well, they end up worse than the goat. That's.
And then, so that's 3 positive, good karma, you're going to be up here, bad karma, you come back down here. And then starting here are 12 different areas around the outside of the wheel of life. These correspond to kind of in some ways, the stages of life. You start out ignorant when you're born, you know nothing, you're a baby. Then is the process of what's called volitional activity, when you become aware that you can make choices. And then you become conscious of the world around you. And then you become more aware of yourself and your place in the world around you. The next one are the 6 senses. So you know 5 of them. But the 6th one is the mind, because right thinking and consciousness and meditation. So as you become aware of yourself, you begin to experience the world through these 6 senses, and you begin to make contact with others in the world around you. And that will lead you to experience either pleasure or pain. And depending on the feelings that you experience, that might create in you thirst, or which could then lead, this thirst or desire could then lead to grasping, holding on to that which you want to bring pleasure in your life, which means as you begin to grasp, you form these habits that determine who you become. So that next we have a person in labor that they're called birth. You birth your future identity through the good or bad habits that you've become because of what you've grasped based on your desires, until you are old and die and reborn again and start the circle all over. Doesn't that just make you feel good?
So you never ascend to heaven, you stay in the circle as well.
You either stay in the circle, or if you reach nirvana, you're no longer in the wheel.
Okay.
You escaped this
When you reach the
wheel that keeps going
Yeah,
around.
okay.
Is that a chicken or a rooster? The reason I'm asking,
I don't know.
the reason I'm asking, because I don't like roosters to this day for this very thing, because we were in Sri Lanka and on a mission trip, and we were doing a medical whatever, but they had some little bit of kind of a worship something before we did the medical stuff, and it was something, and I don't remember now, but it traumatized me so much, but it was so much about this rooster. And that's why I'm asking you, because ever since then, I can't look at a rooster another way. I associate it with Buddhism, and I just can't. But that's why I'm asking, is it a chicken or a rooster?
My
For some
sources
reason, I just.
that I'm citing and the stuff I've looked at say chicken, but I've never seen rooster, but it
So I don't know what it was. I don't remember if it was, if the rooster was supposedly in a good sense or a bad sense. I don't remember. I just
Well, the
remember
chicken
that
means
it
anger,
works
so-
so much that I
chicken
just
is
don't look
desire.
at roosters the same.
yeah, I think chicken is desire. I don't know.
But the chicken makes more sense, but I was just curious, because that was, I don't remember the details anymore. It traumatized me.
We've learned something about Joyce today.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about worldview, this is the pictorial view of everything we talked about, the four truths and eightfold path. This is how they view life. They look at you can go to most temples and see some depiction of this. Obviously, the artistry will be different. Because when you go to the temples, this is what they're trying to break free from. So it is a little pressing. You could see if you had to stare at this, you'd really want to meditate and get out of this. But this is their worldview. This is how they view life.
What is that little triangle down at the bottom? It's like, a scorpion in there or something? What is
Like
that?
a cow.
So it's a person.
Oh,
This is their head. Their arms are there. Their legs are kind of
Oh,
spread
here,
equal.
it's like a cow
Um,
or a bull.
upside down person.
yeah, their head is down this way.
Okay.
Their legs are up. It's weird.
There's no way to help.
Yeah, I guess so. There's symbols around it, but I don't know what those are.
So you can you get yourself out of hell
So yeah, these three are states of being that you're reincarnated into.
okay,
It's not hell like we think of hell.
all right.
It's a hellish existence on earth. That your bad karma, this is the worst possible existence your karma could reap for you, is whatever this hellish existence is. So there's not a disembodied hell.
And then you gotta start working your way out of that and
Wow.
work your way up the white side.
Yeah.
Okay.
And depending, you might only make it to be, a ghost or an animal. The ghost, the idea here, I think, is not literal a spectral figure as much as you're unseen, you're invisible, you don't matter. You're probably a menial worker. At least here in animal, there's some purpose for that. If you're lucky, you might be. So it's all on earth until you get out of this circle. So even though it says hell, you're right, that's a misunderstanding from our perspective to use that word.
At least if you're an animal, you don't have to be worried about getting eaten. They don't eat
That's true.
animals.
Except by other animals. But yeah, and I don't know how animals build good karma. I don't know how that works, but Anyway. All right, last of our 6 things is social organization. A lot of times we talk about this with how the religious community functions, so you know, like in Christianity, we'd say the social organization is the role of the church. In Buddhism, the temples are not places that are expected to have regular services of worship. So if you're a Buddhist, you don't go to the temple like you do if you're a Christian on Sunday, or a Jew on Saturday, or a Muslim on Friday, or a Hindu regularly. The temple isn't that place of worship as much as it's a shrine. It's a place for the monks. It's a shrine to where you want to get, which is why in the social organization, you basically fall into one of 2 classes. You're a Sangha, which is the community of monastics. So you're not while they reject the caste system, the highest place you can be in society is when you become a monk or a nun. You make it, you've done enough, you've achieved enough, you've denied yourself enough that you join this particular group. You renounce all your worldly possessions, your clothes are supplied. Typically, companies, and particularly in the East, make donations of cloth enough to make robes for the monks that are there and nuns that are there. You have none of the adornment, you don't have to worry about money. You're just going to meditate. That's as high as you can go. And everybody else is just the lady, which is anybody that's practicing Buddhism that isn't ordained. Their whole social organization is, are you a monk? Are you really trying? Or are you just a regular person stuck on the wheel? If you're a monk, you might be like about ready to leave this cycle of birth and reincarnation. So in any sort of caste system, no. In any sort of structure that the religious community brings, no. Just a matter of, are you a monk and you've denounced everything, or are you a lay person who is practicing Buddhism but isn't ready to free yourself of all your desire? And that's your choices. Social organization is it's kind of like sacred writings. There's not really a Bible. There's not really a strict thing. It's kind of like God. It's like, no, there's not really a God. So society, if all of us are suffering in this life, and all of us don't want to suffer, all that society is about is, have you reached the point where you're letting go of enough things that you can give up, become a monk or not? And that tells you where you are.
Well, if everybody did that, who would bring them their food, or
It's a great
build
question.
their temples, or
It's kind of a dilemma, isn't it?
it's like, we all want to get there, but some of y'all got to keep working.
Yeah. You got to work because
Who's going to bring me my food?
I got to go to your house and get my bowl filled at 11 a.m. and eat it before noon. Yeah. It's really logic. It defies the logic.
There's no logic.
But that's what happens when you starve yourself and sit under a tree for 5 years. You come up with nutso ideas.
So how did he come to the depiction of such a large person if he starved himself under the tree?
When he came to realize this, and he attracted followers, suddenly he had things that he didn't have when he was all by himself, starving himself to somehow rid himself of suffering. By ridding himself of suffering, one of the ways he rid himself was he rid himself of the hunger that filled him. But I think the picture of the Buddha as the rounded fellow goes back to his wealthy beginnings.
But that's when they called him the happy Buddha.
The happy Buddha, yes.
Right.
Not the emaciated, angry Buddha, depressed Buddha.
Now, this is a religion that could only be practiced in my view, in climates that have no winters. They don't suffer any winters.
Well, they have winter in Tibet.
Yeah,
They're
Oh,
cold
that is-
like crazy in Tibet.
Because they're only wrapped in robes.
well, I mean,
That's my question. Okay, then they do. They're
Monastic.
northern climates.
the monastic life, the community of other Buddhists, including wealthy donors, provides you what you need. I would guess there's also that sort of, I don't know, sadistic pride and the little bit of suffering that goes in a cold climate, not having the parka. You know, look at me denying myself. Look at me letting go of this.
Just to me, I picture this in India climate. It's
Not so much in India.
warmer than cold.
This is Tibetan or.
Tibet there, but I don't have the map from last week, but if you remember, India didn't have a lot of Buddhists. It was Tibet, Nepal, on up into China, over toward Japan, Korea. This is Thailand, probably, yes, you got that way or so. Not that there aren't Buddhists in
You
India.
haven't mentioned rice yet, so I leave
Rice?
I leave China out. So, you haven't.
I mean, I have a friend I work with who is a Buddhist, but I don't see any of, I mean, obviously she's living in the Western world, she's a nurse and she, you know, she says she can't. But it just, you know, so sometimes I'm almost curious about, you know, I don't want to be offensive either, but I might have to ask her a couple of questions.
We just talked about Buddhism. We just talked about you, and you don't look like a.
I mean, I know she's a Buddhist, but I have never, you know, as far as whatever, I guess think, you know, not having stuff or whatever. I mean, you know, she works a hard job with pay, so it's not, I don't see.
But again, in Buddhism, there's nothing wrong with
No,
it.
I know, I
It's
understand.
the attachment that's the problem.
And,
Because Buddhism requires people with money
yeah,
to support those who have decided to aspire to higher planes of thought and existence, to become enlightened. Yes, ma'am.
Now, from Vietnam, have any of these religions that you're been discussing? Each
I think so.
Which one would they be closest to? Because I talked to my nail tech and she was kind of explaining to me that they don't have gods, but she's got a little Buddha thing that's sitting in her shop.
Probably Buddhists.
So that's what I'm thinking. They say they don't have a God, but yet they worship that little.
Yeah.
well, could that be like you
Guys.
said?
And last week you mentioned that all Buddhists have a little shrine in their own home because they don't go to a temple to worship, that they worship heaven.
I think you had a guilt trip for being born well.
Could that be like he was saying about the temples? The temple isn't necessarily a place to go to worship, but a shrine as to where you want to achieve to. So it's like a
Right, then
memorial, I mean, like a memorandum or however, whatever that word is. I don't, my English is horrible, but you know, like to something to motivate you to continue on.
that they don't,
I don't know. That's how I see it a lot.
right, if they say they don't have a God, but yet they make this
Biggest one.
Oh, yeah.
image.
Oh, yeah, they got a lot.
They're basically the same, very minor differences.
Now,
But yeah. They're probably Buddhist.
it isn't attractive to me anyway.
Hinduism is primarily in India, still. Well, large number.
It seems like I remember seeing a connection to elephants in Buddhist too.
Thailand, oh my God, we're in Thailand.
Yeah, so what is the
Yeah.
connection between elephant, I mean, it wasn't on our map or our circle.
No, I don't know. I'd have to Google it.
That's what I did.
I was just about to do that. Maybe because they're chubby like.
Maybe because, yeah,
I'm
Elephants,
sorry. I'm actually gonna look up roosters in Buddhism.
okay.
I never really thought about it. You said-
they're associated with wisdom, strength, patience, and peace
In Buddhism or in general?
in Buddhism.
Okay.
What was it?
They're
Wisdom,
associated
strength,
with,
patience, and peace.
Oh,
yeah, wisdom,
But they aren't
strength,
concerned
patience.
with anybody except their own well-being. Is that it? It's self-centered.
It seems to be largely, yes. I mean, obviously some of, because part of it is you want to get rid of, suffering comes from attachment.
Right.
And so if you're ridding yourself of suffering by ridding yourself of attachment, that is going to include people.
Right.
Because as we said last week, who can hurt you the most? The people you're closest to.
Right.
Buddhism incorporates a rooster as a symbol of awakening and enlightenment.
Oh, well, so the hen is attachment and desire.
We have, yeah, there you go.
Interesting.
Considered protectors against misfortune and demons. Having painted a rooster in your home is believed to offer protection against fire.
So that's interesting. That's more mystical
Yeah,
kind of a way of looking at things.
I don't know, but there was a little shrine of a rooster that freaked me out. That's all I got to say.
I know what to get Joyce for Christmas. Big picture of a rooster. All right, well, that was all I had. Any more questions? I don't know where we'll go next week. What faith? Maybe Hare Krishna. I'll grow a ponytail this week.
There was a Hare Krishna, that lived across the street from my dad.
Oh, yeah?
Back in the seventies. And it was where my dad lived, right across the street. It was a very large piece of property. And this gentleman had built this big ornate, house for his daughter as a wedding gift. And she ended up not marrying the guy that he wanted, and he's like, "You're not getting the house." So it sat there for the longest time.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden, one day, there's Hare Krishna everywhere, and they're out there and they're plowing the grass up, and they're planting all kinds of vegetables and stuff.
Interesting.
And my dad went over there and was like, "What are you doing here?" You know, first of all, and they're like, "You know, we don't mean any harm. We're releasing the property or whatever." So my dad made friends with them, and on Sundays, every Sunday, they would come over with this big platter of food
Oh, wow.
as a thank you for being a neighbor.
Interesting.
So we never converted or anything, but.
Good to know. Good to know.
You ate well, though.
Very interesting.
So now that property's FIU?
Just about, yeah.
There you go. When in doubt.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for sticking around, coming out. Let me pray and then we'll call it a day or a night. Father in heaven, we thank you for your grace and love that you've demonstrated through Jesus. We thank you that you have provided for our salvation. We thank you for the privilege we have of knowing you. And beyond that, for even as we consider Buddhism and kind of the isolatedness of it, the self-centeredness of it, a reminder of how much we need each other and how much in relationship we grow and we can become more like you as we learn what it means to love and care for and serve each other. Father, help us to keep those values high in our minds and help your character to be formed more in us each day, we pray. Bless us as we leave tonight. Keep us safe, particularly if there's rain on the roads. And Lord, we look forward to gathering together as your people on Sunday and worship for all you are and all you have done. Praying in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.